Okay. Shkoyach to everybody. Now we start the next chapter of Kiddushin. And on Shabbos, God willing, we'll do this Yomi at 5:15 on Shabbos afternoon. But we'll start the daf now because this is just unbelievable, uh, really beautiful page of the Talmud. So the Talmud says, Ha'ish Mekadesh. This is one of my favorite pages of the Talmud, and you'll see why in a moment. Ha'ish Mekadesh Bo Ubeshlucho. The man can betroth the woman through himself or through an agent. Haisha Miskadeshes. The woman can become betrothed. The woman herself can accept a betrothal. Ba herself, she can accept it ubeshlucha or through her agent. Haish Mekadesh Espito. Kishihinara, the man can betroth his daughter when she is a young minor, when she's even before she's a Bulgaris, when she's from the age of 12 to 12 and a half. And Rashi points out, and for sure when she's a minor under 12. If he accepts the Kiddushin on her behalf, she's betrothed. And the reason why he mentions a Nara, Rashi says, is because that's the normal way to do it. But a minor under the age of 12, ideally, you should not do it. Shinara, and so the father can accept it, Bo himself or through his agent. So the Gemara now asks the question, the famous question, well, if the man can betroth the woman with his agent, Bo mibaye, then why does it need to say that he can betroth her himself? Of course, if he could betroth her with an agent, of course he can betroth her himself. So the Gemara explains, Amar Rav Yosef, mitzvah bo yoser mi b'shlucho, because it's a greater mitzvah to do it yourself than to do it with your agent. This was when I wrote my first Torah. This is what we put on the parochas mitzvah. This is what we put on the mantle of the Torah. Mitzvah bo yoser mi b'shlucho. It's a greater mitzvah to do something yourself than to have your agent do it. She explains the chiasak, gufo b'mitzvos mekabel schler tfei. When he himself gets involved in the mitzvos, then he gets more reward. So Kihad Rav Safra, what would Rav Safra do? Machrich Reisha. Now, when Rav Safra was cook, he would be the one to cook for Shabbos. And what would he do? If there was the head of an animal for Shabbos and he needed to cook it, he would make it the work himself. And Rava Malach Shibuta, Rava would salt the fish himself for Shabbos. They would actually cook for Shabbos. Alternative answer. What's the alternative answer? The alternative answer is that the alternative answer is Baha Isura Nami Ispa. That it's not just that it's a greater reason to do it. It's not just that which we said that when he doesn't. So the Gemara is going to bring another reason why the Tana said that Aish is Mekadesh Bo B'Shlucho. So an alternative answer is that when he doesn't see the woman before Kiddushin and he betroths her through the Shliach, not only is it not the case that it's not a mitzvah, but rather Isur Nami Ispa. It's not only not ideal, but it's also a prohibition. Kid Rabbi Yehuda Amarav, Rabbi Yehuda Amarav, also Adam Sheyikadesh. It's prohibited for a man to betroth the woman before he sees her. Shema Yerba Davar Amaguna, because maybe if he's married to her and he hasn't seen her yet, maybe when he sees her, he's not going to be attracted to her. And it'll be something bad. You're supposed to love your wife. And so if you don't find her attractive, it's going to be a violation of the prohibition of you love your neighbor like you love yourself. Rashi says, if he could betroth her by himself, but he does it through an agent, it's a prohibition because the mitzvah sheyirena. It's a mitzvah for him to see her beforehand. Maybe maybe otherwise he would not be attracted to her. So the Gemara says, and when they said this position of Rav Yosef, that the reason why it says this in the Mishnah is because it's a greater mitzvah, mitzvah bo yoser mi b'shlucho. This position of Rav Yosef aseifa. That was said not about the first part, but about the concluding clause. Isha miskadesh ba'u b'shlucha. The woman is betrothed. She can accept the betrothal herself or through her agent. And hashta b'shlucha mekacha b'mipaya. Well, if she can accept it through her agent, why does it need to say through her herself? So Amar Rav Yosef. And about this, Rav Yosef says, mitzvah ba yoser mishlucha. It's a special mitzvah herself to do it more than her agent. And kihad Rav Safra machrech reisha. Rav Safra was burning the head of the animal himself to cook it, and for Shabbos, and Rava mal shibuta. But Rava was burning the fish. Aval baha. But in this case, even though she wouldn't see her husband beforehand, that would be okay for her to accept the agency, the betrothal through an agent. Why? People aren't going to like this, and I don't think this is true anymore today, but this is what in the time of the Gemara could do Reish Lakish, meaning to say she even through her agent can accept her. Why? The Amar Reish Lakish Tavameitav Tandumi Meitav Armalu. That it's better for a woman would say in those days that it's better for a woman to say about her husband, I'd rather live with him than live by myself. So even if she's not even if she doesn't find him attractive, she'd still want to be married to him. So now we're up to the next clause in the mission. The clause says, "Aish mekadesh espito kishinara." The man could betroth his daughter when she's at Nara. Baruch atah Adonai Melech HaMashiach Kol Niyeh B'Dvaro. Kishinara in kishikatana lo. When she's a Nara, you can betroth her, but not when she's a minor. So Messiah Rav. This is therefore a support for Rav. Damar Rav Yehuda Marav Item Rav Elazar. Also, Adam Sheikadech Espito Kishikatana Ad Shatikadel. So we see that Rav says he has to wait for her to be above a minor, meaning to say when a Nara is from 12 to 12 and a half. So he can't betroth her until she grows up. Vitomer Beponi Ani wrote that. So Rav says she can't do it as a Nara, but as a Katana, but she can do it as a Nara. Tosfos says. Now, so it says earlier that there's no prohibition for a woman to be accepted because Tavameitav Tandumi or Meitav Armalu, that she'd rather live with anybody than live by herself. That's only by an adult. But when she betroths it by herself, because since she agrees to it, we don't have to be concerned that maybe she'll change her mind. But a minor, if her father betrothed her, we have to be concerned that maybe if she's an adult, she wouldn't like it. And so now Tosfos says a very, very famous line. He says, now that we have the practice to betroth our minor daughters, Tosfos is writing in medieval France in the 12th and 13th centuries, why are we marrying off our minor daughters? Tosfos says, because Shebekol Yom Vayom Hagolas Miskaber. Every day the diaspora is growing harder and harder, and there are more and more persecutions. And if he can marry her off now, give her a dowry, we're concerned that maybe later on he won't be able to do it. And then she's going to stay in his house as a aguna forever. So therefore, because of the exile, they would arrange for their children to be married off. It doesn't mean that they would be in a physical relationship until they're old enough, but it means that they would be married off, and the arranged marriages would happen at a young age. Nowadays, many rabbis have spoken about how it's absolutely prohibited for a person to do this, and it should not be done anymore. So now we go on in the Gemara. So the Gemara asks the fundamental question, Shlichus Minolan. The Gemara asks the question, how do we know that there is this concept of agency? So we learned that you can have agency in our Mishnah. So how do we know that there's a concept of an agent? Where does it come from? So the Gemara explains, the Tanya, we learned in a Brisa with respect to divorce. It says he writes for a bill of divorce and he puts it in her hands and he sends her out from her home. And from the fact that it doesn't say v'girsho mi beiso, but it says v'shilcha mi beiso. So we learn from here, v'shilach melamed shehu says shliach. He can make an agent. V'shilcha melamed shehi says shliach, and she can make an agent. So that's the concept. V'shilach v'shilcha, and from the fact that it says, and so from the fact that it says v'shilach, and from the fact that it says v'shilcha, melamed shliach osa shliach. We learn from that even the agent himself can make another agent, because the verse states that the pasuk states the word v'shuach twice in this context, because it says because of what I say for crucis v'nasam b'yadav v'shilcha mi beisa, And it says v'shilech, and then v'shilcha, so it's as though it says it twice. So that teaches us that even the agent can make another shliach. So the Gemara says, Ashkam v'gerushin, okay, we find the concept of agency by a divorce. B'kiddushin, we know, and how do we know that it works by betrothal? V'chitei madiyah v'gerushin, if you want to say we're now that you can make an agent for betrothal from divorce. Why? Why don't we say mala gerushin shekesh shekin yeshnam bal karcha? Why don't we say by a divorce can be done against your will? That's why we can use an agent. But how do we know that you can do it by betrothal too? So this says the verse Amakrava Yatzav Haisa. It says she went out and she goes with another man, which means Makish Havayel Yitzia. We compare betrothal, divorce to betrothal. Ma Yitzia Mashvi Shliach, just like divorce makes her an agent. So too, for betrothal, you can make an agent. Gemara says, okay, so you see you can make an agent, but what about the following case? And what about that which we learned in the Mishnah? Somebody says to his agent, say to Rome, if somebody says to his agent, go out and separate a tithe for me from my produce, separate truma, but he doesn't tell him what measurements exactly to take. Torah and Kedas Balabayas. He can do it according to, we're talking about a guy who works for him, so he can do it according to what he thinks this person would typically do. If he knows he's generous, he would give 1/40th. If he knows he's stingy, he'd give 1/60th. So that's what he would do. And because the truma doesn't have a specific amount in the Torah, so really any amount works. But if you tell your agent, go out and separate the tithe for me, he could do what the agent can act on basis of what he thinks he wants. The owner would want. And if he doesn't have any clue what he would want, he should give like the normal manner, which is 1/50th. Let's say he diminishes it by 10% or adds on by 10%, meaning he gives 1/40th or 1/60th. Then it's a valid truma. The agency is good. Now we're on top of Mema from a base ask the Gemara, and if you're going to say the off the Gerushin, that we're going to learn it out from divorce, that we learn the concept of agency from divorce. But just like agency works by divorce, so too it works by truma. Why don't we say that they're not similar? Meaning to say, what's the reason why it works by divorce? The Gemara is asking the question. No, what's our source that the agency works by truma? What's the source that the agency works by truma? So the Gemara says the source for it is maybe Gerushin is different because it's not truma, it's chulin, and generally throughout the Talmud you can't compare the truma, which is the sacred, to the chulin. So you can't compare the kodesh to the chol. So the Gemara says it's based upon the pasuk. Amar Kra, it's based upon the pasuk, and what does the verse say? Atem came to rimu gam atem trumas Hashem. The word gam atem, the rabbis shliach. That words also you includes the agent. Gemara says v'nichtav rachmana b'truma v'nesu hanach v'nigmaru minei. Why don't we the Torah just write it by truma, and then we can learn divorce and betrothal that there's an agent from the truma. Gemara says no, you can't learn out agency by divorce and betrothal from truma mishum deikol mifrach shekain yeshnan b'machshava, because truma applies even if you don't actually do anything. You just think it. You just have the concept without actually doing anything. You just look at it. You could just look at it and designate in your mind. So therefore, that's the concept. So therefore, you can't learn out from there to divorce. Rashi says shekein yeshnam b'machshava kachim. So no sin ena b'tzad zeh v'ochel b'tzad zeh. You could put your eyes on one part and designate on the other because it says v'nechshav. So the Gemara says, well, also by carbon shchitas Pesach, we would say that by carbon Pesach we also have agency by a carbon Pesach. And what's the source for that? Ask the Gemara. V'hadet tanan. Now, which we learned in Pesachim 98b, that if you have a chabura, if you have a group of people, she'avad pischa, that they separated a lamb for their carbon Pesach, and the lamb was lost. The amru la'achad say uvakish, and they said to one of the people, go out and search for this lamb. They said to one of the people from the group, go out and search for this animal and slaughter it for us. Then the guy goes out and he finds the lamb and he slaughters it. And the people of the group that they didn't know if the agent had found the animal or not. They didn't know if he found the first animal. And so they didn't know v'lakhu v'shachtu. So they went and they got a new animal and they slaughtered it. Im shalo nishlat rishon. And so the Gemara says, what's the law? If the Paschal lamb that the agent found first was slaughtered first, then he and the group that appointed him to go out and slaughter it, um, then they're going to be on his sacrifice, and therefore they can't be appointed to a new sacrifice. And so therefore, who ochel mishalo, vehem ochel misho temimo. So his sacrifice is good. He was their agent, and so therefore they eat and drink with him. So what's our source for that? Minoah, and how do we know that an agent could represent them? So the Gemara says, and if you want to say you learn out the position of Paschal lamb from Truma or divorce, those cases are totally different. Why? Because Truma and divorce are going to be considered with respect to Kachim like Chulin. Because even though Truma is considered sacred with respect to the Paschal lamb, it's going to be considered like something that's not sacred. Meaning to say, because it could be in anywhere. It doesn't only have to be in Jerusalem. And so therefore it's more lenient. And so therefore, how do you know that you can learn agency for a Paschal lamb from the Truma? So the Gemara says, well, we'll learn it out. Nafko to Rabbi Yeshua ben Karacha. We learn that from Rabbi Yeshua ben Karacha. Some say that this was the son of Rabbi Akiva, was sometimes called Kireach, the bald one, where he says, Minayin sheshlucho shel adam kamo. So how do we know that an agent can serve as your representative? As it says, V'shachtu oso kol kahal adas Yisrael bein arbayim. The whole congregation will slaughter the animal in the afternoon. Then will the entire congregation completely slaughter the animal? But we know that the entire community doesn't come and slaughter it, but rather one person slaughters it on behalf of their group. So we see from here that an agent of a person can that a person can represent everybody, and so therefore one person from the community slaughters it on behalf of everyone. So the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, why doesn't the Torah just teach it to us by the Korban Pesach? And therefore we'll learn it out from the Korban Pesach to all the other cases. So the Gemara says, no, we're not going to say that. We're not going to say that because by kachim, by sacred food, most of the actions are done through an agency. For example, when the Kohen is representing us, the receiving of the blood, the sprinkling, that's all done through an agent. And so therefore, kachim is different because it's supposed to be done from an agent. So now we have all these laws where we learned we have the law of the Paschal lamb. We have the law of the truma. We have the law of divorce, and we have the agency in all these cases. So so we can't learn out divorce or truma or Pesach one from the other. But teisi chada mitarti. But why don't we learn out the third one from the first two? So the Gemara says, which third one from the first two? Hi teisi o nechtov rachmana b'kachim. Maybe the Torah shouldn't write about kachim, but teisi mihanach, and therefore you can learn out the Paschal lamb from truma and divorce. You can't because those are both more lenient. They're more chol. They're regular vis-a-vis the Korban Pesach, which is more sacred. So okay, the Torah shouldn't write it by divorce, and we'll learn it out from Korban Pesach and Truma. The Gemara says, well, that can't work because both Truma and the Pesach can happen through thought, because Rashi says kachim nami can be done through thought. Meaning to say, if a person has in mind to make a pledge in their mind, then it's as though they made it. So this is good to remember on Yom Kippur. If you're so worked up on Yom Kippur, the rabbi is giving a drasha, and he says everybody has to give charity, and in mind you say, I'm giving this amount of money. So then we're going to know that's binding upon you. So that so the Gemara says, well, maybe the Torah wouldn't need to write it by Truma, and you can learn it out, Truma from divorce, and also from the case of the Pesachim. The Gemara says, no, this also wouldn't work. Why? Hachinami, this also, the Gemara says, really, it is the case that you can learn out Truma from Pesachim and divorce. You can learn out the law of an agent by Truma from the law of agent by Korban Pesach and divorce. Ela atem gam atem lamali. Well, if that's the case, why do we need the pasuk? The Gemara says, I'll tell you why we need that pasuk. We need like Rabbi Yana, who taught them Rabbi Yana gam atem means ma'atem b'nei bris ashulchami b'nei bris. That the person who could separate your tithe can be your agent, but only if he's another Jew. Well, if that's the case, Gemara says, "Halamali kra." Why do we need a pasuk to tell us this law? We learned it out. Amar Rabbi Bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yochanan Eina Evan Nasa Shliach Kabel Get. Why do we need a verse? We have Rabbi Bar Abu said the name of Rabbi Yochanan who said that a slave cannot become an agent to receive the gift from her husband because he's not involved in the laws of Gittin and Kiddushin. So we see that of course you need to be a Jew in order to be your agent in these matters. Mar says no. But you might have thought the slave can accept a divorce because he can never marry her. But but an idolater, but an idolater, since he has the law of truma, which he separates from his crop that grew in his field, that even though he's not obligated to do it, nevertheless, if he separated it, it would be called a truma. Then we might have thought that he can therefore be your agent to take off the truma. As we learned this, we learned in Mishnah and Truma. If you have an idolater who takes the tithe, truma, so truma. So their truma is a valid truma. So ema shliach nami of it. So maybe they could also be agents. Kamash malan, we don't say that. We say that the idolater can't be your agent to separate the truma. Gemara says, Rabbi Shimon, and according to Rabbi Shimon, the patar. And according to Rabbi Shimon, who says that a non-Jew who separates his truma, it's not a valid truma, and therefore someone who eats from it is exempt from the fifth, the tanan, truma sovekuchava midamas, that if the truma of an idolater and it gets mixed up, chayav no elish chomesh. The chum say you have to take a fifth if you ate from it, or you want to redeem it, because it's considered truma, whereas Rabbi Shimon poter. So if that's the case, according to Rabbi Shimon says an idolater, we have no thought that he would be able to be your agent. His truma is not even a valid truma. So according to Rabbi Shimon, atem gam atem wamalei. The Gemara says, why do we need the pasuk of atem gam atem? What is it teaching us? We already know for sure that an idolater can't be your agent to be the truma. And where it says Itzrach t'sakadai techamina, you might have thought, oh v'amar maratem. You might have said, since it says you v'lo arisin atem shitfun, that who can separate the truma? You and not your sharecroppers. They can't separate the truma from the balabais. Atem v'shutfim, atem v'apotropos. You and not your partners or your executors. Atem v'atorim she'ena shalo. Atem v'shlo. I might have thought you can't have an agent for truma. So therefore, Kamash Malan, that a shliach can be torem from Rabbi Shimon from the words gamatem. All right, we'll stop here. God willing, we'll repeat this stuff much slower on Shabbos, much more